Hello everyone, this is Chernobyl Hobo, and yes, this is indeed my hairy face, and it's good to be talking to you all, and I just want to say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for getting me to 5,000 subscribers. When I started out, I didn't even think I'd reach 500, and now I'm at 5,000, and hopefully we can push for even more. But as for right now, in honor of that, I'm going to be doing a Q&A. So let's do this. This is just going to be a pretty unedited video. I'll probably cut out like some stupid stuff, if any stupid stuff comes up in this video. But for the most part, this is not going to be a well-processed, well-thought-out video. It's just going to be me answering questions. We're going to start out with a question from Ramen Bomber Deluxe. In reference to the issues I personally had, what did you think of the show's warped priorities, from demonizing innocent or mildly bad people like Pink and Kevin, yet making excuses for others like the Diamonds, to the many other bumps in the road this show has? I know it's a more moody question, and I apologize, but I think us fans need to be critical sometimes, like you were in this video. Thank you so much, Ramen Bomber Deluxe, and I totally agree with you. I think it's really important that even if you're a fan of something, you should be willing to be critical of it sometimes, because ultimately, I think the things that we care about the most are the things that we understand the most, and we can see these faults with it. And I think by talking about these faults, it can make people aware of the show's mistakes and the things the show did right, so that when future people make shows, they can learn from this series what it did right and what it did wrong. As for how I feel about some of the things you mentioned, Kevin is just sort of like, Kevin's inconsequential. I know that it's sort of a meme about how this show redeems some pretty awful people, but at the same time absolutely despises Kevin, and Kevin's just dunked on and everybody hates Kevin. But I feel to a certain extent that's just sort of like, that's played up for comedy. He's just sort of this jerk that Steven doesn't like, and in the grand scheme of things, even though he deals with far worse people, he's the one guy who's just like, I hate Kevin. So in the grand scheme of things, he's a very inconsequential character, so it's not that big a deal. Pink, the thing with Pink is that Pink, I think, is ultimately supposed to represent how you're growing up and certain family members are treated with like high regard. People talk about how they're this really good person. If they're not around anymore, you're told about how great they were. But as you get older, you learn more about them and realize they weren't a perfect person. They had flaws. They did some wrong things. And Pink is ultimately supposed to represent that, because a big theme of Steven Universe is family and family dynamics. And Pink slots into that position of going from this idolized person to this person that we realize is the source of a lot of the character's issues, particularly Pearl. Pink really messed up Pearl. Ultimately, I'm not against the whole Rose being Pink Diamond thing. I know a lot of people think that twist was like the moment the series was dead to them. I'm not one of those people. But ultimately, the big point of what you're saying here is how it's weird how the show is very critical of Pink's actions while also redeeming the Diamonds. And I can understand that to a certain extent. I mean, I'm not one of those people who feels like the Diamonds never should have been redeemed, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, this is Steven Universe. Steven Universe is all about redemption and all that stuff. So the Diamonds being redeemed isn't that surprising of a thing in the grand scheme of things, but it's how it's executed. Blue and Yellow Diamond are one thing, because at least earlier on, we understand how they're dealing with like a lot of sadness due to the death of Pink, and how they've been struggling with that for millennia. And that gives us an idea of like who these characters are, and an idea that like they're not just these horrible people. They do have emotions. They do care about the people close to them. But then we run into the issue with White Diamond, who is the total opposite of that. She is just pure, emotionless, sociopathic, completely repressed emotions. And the problem is that the series wants to have its cake and eat it too, where they want to present White Diamond as this just completely emotionless, terrible person that's willing to marionette her own family if they stand up to her, while at the same time you have to have her redeemed at the end in order to save all the uncorrupted gems, and it just doesn't work. And I know that a big part of that is just because Cartoon Network ultimately they really screwed over Rebecca Sugar when it came to the end of Steven Universe, because after the wedding, they were basically like, this series can't continue because we're going to lose international markets for this wedding. So you're only going to get this many episodes and then the series has to end. And then they did Future, but it's not like Future can make up for the rushed pace of Change Your Mind and the episodes preceding it. So it's not fully the crew or Rebecca Sugar's fault. They were stuck in a really compromising situation. And I completely can understand why Sugar decided to stick to her guns and do the wedding, because that's something that meant a lot to her, and it just felt wrong to her to just allow the executives to stop her from doing that when it meant so much to her. She stood up for what she believed in, and I think that should be respected. But at the same time, that doesn't negate the fact that Change Your Mind is ultimately very rushed. And one of the most rushed elements is that we have this very jarring change of total sociopath to redeemed. And it just doesn't really work for me. And I really think it was important to have, say, an episode where we see into their past and we see their reaction to Pink's death, and we see that that's ultimately a catalyst for why she's so repressive of her emotions, or at least that's part of what plays into it, so we can at least understand her more as a character. It feels like we don't really get any insight into who she is until the moment she's redeemed, and it just doesn't work. I feel like they should have tried to find some room to flesh out her more as a character, so that when she is ultimately redeemed, it feels more earned. But as it is, that is definitely like one of the standout like flaws of the series to me, is just that very jarring redemption of White Diamond. Blue and Yellow, it's more forgivable because at the very least they've established how these characters feel. One other thing is, like, I feel like the direction they should have gone for when it came to redeeming the diamonds is they should have put more emphasis on the fact that the gem empire is an empire that exists purely for the sake of just expanding for no reason. It doesn't serve any purpose. The diamonds themselves don't serve much purpose beyond their role as leaders. And the same way that all these other different gems, they all serve a purpose, and they stick to that purpose, and they commit to that purpose completely. And I think if they'd gone the direction of showing how the diamonds are ultimately sort of stuck in this cycle as well and need to be broken free of it, I think if they leaned more into that aspect of the story, it would have made the diamond redemptions work better. But unfortunately, didn't work out that way. Not entirely the crew's fault, but it is what it is. And that is definitely an issue with the series. A series of questions from LPJ22. Any direct-to-video movie that you liked or considered to be decent? Brave Little Toaster. Brave Little Toaster. Love that film. Loved it since I was a kid. It's an absolutely underrated gem of a film. Great music. I genuinely think that that's a film that could have definitely been aired in theaters. There has been much, much worse films that have made it to theaters. I think it's a great direct-to-video film, and if you haven't seen Brave Little Toaster, please give it a shot. The song Worthless and the whole sequence that goes along with that is probably one of my favorite animated sequences of all time. I just absolutely love that film. Any new cartoon from 2020 that you recommend? I cannot recommend enough Kipo. Kipo, Age of Wonder Beasts. It is a great series, and it's already over. It's only 30 episodes long, 3 seasons, and it's already come to completion. But I think it worked. I was worried at first when it was that short, but it gets in, it tells its story, and by the end, it just feels satisfying. And it's just so good across multiple different areas. It has a great art style to it. It has fantastic animated sequences, like really awesome fight scenes. Its world is just this beautiful post-apocalyptic world with all these cool different mutant tribes that are all just really interesting to come across. So much of the first season is just spent meeting all these different types of mutants so that when the time comes, they all play a really big part in the climax of the story. You care about all these tribes because you've been introduced to all of them, and they're all these just really unique, interesting societies, and I really like that. And the characters, there's so many great characters, like Wolf. I love the character Wolf, and I love the villain Scarlemagne. Scarlemagne is such a good villain, and the voice acting for Scarlemagne, that voice actor just knocks it out of the park. I could just go on and on. Maybe someday I'll make a video about Kipo, but as for right now, I'm just gonna say, if you haven't seen Kipo yet, watch it. I think it's the standout cartoon of 2020 to debut this year. Other people will say Owl House. I think Owl House is, there's good things about it, and there's not so great things about it. I'll probably be doing a video on that in the future. Ultimately, I think Kipo is the best cartoon to debut in 2020. Thoughts on the Hotel Transylvania trilogy? I'm going to preface this by saying Genndy Tartakovsky is my favorite animation director ever. I love his work to death. Samurai Jack is my favorite cartoon. So many of his other series I care so much about. Dexter, his work on a lot of the early episodes of Powerpuff Girls, Clone Wars. He is genuinely just one of the most important animators of all time, in my opinion. With that, I feel like the trilogy as a whole, I only have seen the first, and I saw that years ago, so my opinion of it isn't really fresh. But my general view of the trilogy is, it's, on one side you have a guy like Genndy, an artistic genius, who is really pushing CGI with these films and just creating this great squash and stretch. Well, it's not just Genndy, it's also all the talented people working on the films. But the way that squash and stretch and all these other methods are used really makes these films stand out from a visual perspective. It definitely looks much more energetic and interesting to look at than a lot of CGI animated films. But on the other side, you have the executives. You have the sort of generic feeling to certain aspects of it. You have the fact that it's a trilogy when it doesn't really need to be. You could have just left it at the original film and it would have just been fine. And instead they just turned this into a trilogy because they figured it makes money, make it a trilogy. And I feel like that money and Genndy Tartakovsky's time would have been much better invested in something like the Popeye film that he wanted to make. Instead, they spent so much money milking this franchise to death, and it's unfortunate. I think if it had just stayed the first film, even with that film not necessarily being perfect, there's some sort of awkward things about it. I still think it stands out, at least from a visual perspective. It's unfortunate how eventually they just sort of stretched out to the point where it's like, it's hard to appreciate it as a series, even with such a great person directing the films. And I really wish that Genndy was given the opportunity to do other things by Sony Animations. And hopefully someday they do let him do something like the Popeye film. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I think for all the work that Gendy's done for them, basically being chained to this cash cow of a franchise, not being able to escape, it would be nice if they gave him at least that opportunity to just make something awesome like that Popeye film. But unfortunately, it is what it is, and I think that it's a franchise that feels like it's playing tug of war between talented artists and hack executives, essentially. Do you think Sony Animation will redeem themselves after Into the Spider-Verse? It all comes down to, will they make more films like Into the Spider-Verse? They're already making a sequel, so if that sequel is even anywhere close, it doesn't even need to be as good as Into the Spider-Verse, because asking it to be as good as Into the Spider-Verse, it's just impossible, because that's one of the best animated films of all time, period. It's absolutely jaw-droppingly good. So good that it forced the Oscars, they had to win it. Like, even though you could tell they really wanted to give it to Pixar, they had to give it to Into the Spider-Verse because it was that good. If Into the Spider-Verse 2 is anywhere near the first film, that's great. The new film, I think it's called Connected. If that film's good, that I think ultimately when it comes down to it, they need to use the talented people they have and just give them the opportunity to tell great stories with great art. And just as long as you do that, as long as you provide them the resources and don't get in their way and don't executive meddle and milk things to death and all that stuff, and don't do stupid stuff like the Emoji Movie, avoid doing stupid stuff like that ever again, I totally think that Sony can redeem themselves. I think they have talented people working there, and I think that they can ultimately pull that off. It just comes down to, will these executives play ball, or will they get in the way of these artists? I do not know. Time will tell. But I think, can they? Yes, they can. Will they? It's up to them. I'm not going to make any full prediction of that. Indigo Inked asks, most recent thing you've watched? I just finished OKKO the other day and highly recommend to anyone who hasn't already seen it. Well, I already talked about it, but Kipo was the most recent thing I've probably watched. Finishing up the 3rd season. I guess going back a little further, I recently watched for the first time Lupin the Third, Castle of Cagliostro, which was Hayao Miyazaki's first directorial film debut. It's a good film. It's a really good film. It has that classic old school anime feel, and it's just neat to see one of the greatest animation directors of all time at their start. Even if you don't really know the characters all that much, you really get a sense for them. I mean, I know that the portrayal of Lupin is a bit more like dashing rogue, while in the actual like source material, he's more of just a total scoundrel. You still don't feel lost, I'd say. And I feel like it's an easy film to just pick up and watch. It's on Netflix. From an artistic perspective, at the very least, it's a beautiful film, and I definitely recommend it. From Christina Mashayek, I hope I'm not messing up that name. Which cartoon series have you seen that didn't disappoint you in the end? Avatar: The Last Airbender doesn't count because we all know how great it is. Yep. That. I'm glad you added that because it's like, that's such an easy go-to. And now I'm going to go for another easy go-to with Ed, Edd n Eddy Big Picture Show. So many people have praised this ending, and for good reason. It's everything you want in an ending. It's emotionally satisfying. It's Ed, Edd n Eddy finally getting, like, so many other films like surrounding it managed to get their big film, and that was Ed, Edd n Eddy finally getting their big film as a way to finish the series. And the way that it's both a reminder of everything you loved the series for, but also breaks so many of the series' rules, making it feel important and making it just something really cool to watch. Like how for so long the setting of Ed, Edd n Eddy was very finite. You're stuck to this one small area, and it's the way the story is told is just seeing how much you can do with this small setting and this small cast of characters. and it breaks those rules. At the end, we do meet a new character for the first time ever. Like, they never added any new characters over the course of the story. They never had a Poochie moment. It was always the same core cast of characters from beginning to end. And by adding at the very end this Eddie's brother, it felt like it was breaking the rules, but in an interesting way. And how we leave this setting and go on this adventure to reach Eddie's brother, you feel that feeling of adventure because we've never gone outside of the cul-de-sac. So you get this same feeling that the Eds are feeling, because you as a viewer are also going completely into the unknown because you've never seen outside of this small area. And that just works so well. It really just feels like a film that was made for the people who grew up watching it, and it's just such a perfect end to that series. Ed, Edd n Eddy is one of my favorite cartoons of all time. It's probably my second favorite Cartoon Network show, just behind Samurai Jack, which is my favorite cartoon of all time. But I absolutely love Ed, Edd n Eddy, and I think that that's just probably, it might be my favorite animated finale ever to a series. It's just so good. Can't praise it enough. What are some lesser known mature animated films in the vein of MFKC you believe deserve more attention? Coming from Lauren Jones. I believe the film Padak, also known as Swimming to Sea, I believe that is definitely an incredibly underrated film. You know how I was saying, like, the number of reviews that MFKZ had on IMDb was disappointing? This is so much lower than MFKZ's numbers. Only 184 people have reviewed it on IMDb, and I think it deserves a lot more than that. It is a really great film. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's this really sort of tragic, tense, brutal film about these fish stuck in a sushi tank, essentially being on death row, and how they deal with that and how they manage to survive, and their philosophies on like how they want to go about things, where most of the fish in the tank have just resigned themselves to they're going to die in this tank. They're just going to try and survive as long as they can, and they're terrified of the outside world because it's unknown to them. So even though they're just sitting and waiting to die in this tank, they ultimately are choosing that over going into the unknown of the ocean. And the one fish that is from the ocean really wants to get back because they know what the ocean's like, and they struggle to try and convince these other fish to embrace the unknown. And it's supposed to be very reflective of the director of the film was inspired by seeing a fish tank outside of a sushi place and feeling a connection with those fish because he was trapped in a job that he felt trapped in the same way they were trapped in that tank. And so when you think about it from that perspective, it grows beyond that, because it's also beyond being this like dark tale of what it's like to be a fish in a fish tank waiting to become sushi. It also represents how people are often stuck in their positions in life, struggle to escape, and some people, even if they could escape, can't bring themselves to because they're scared to do anything else, because the unknown is so much more terrifying than the being trapped where they currently are. And I feel like that's just such a meaningful story. If you haven't seen Padak, please check it out. It deserves your time. I believe you can find it on Amazon Prime. That's one of the places you can watch it. That's where I watched it. It's a great film. Please give it a watch. It deserves it. From JR, what do you think about Gravity Falls? I think Gravity Falls is a good show. Wow, what a hot take there. What a hot take. But really, I mean, what else can be said about Gravity Falls at this point? It's one of the best shows of the 2010s. It's been praised here, there, and everywhere. I guess you could say it's sort of like how Avatar was this ultimate, like, critically praised gem of the 2000s. Gravity Falls was that to the 2010s. I mean, it's not perfect. One of my opinions about it is that I feel that it probably should have gone for a third season. For certain shows, I really appreciate it just having a beginning, middle, and end. Like with Avatar, like with something like Kipo, where it knows what it wants to do, gets in, tells the story, gets out. I can really appreciate that. And on some level, I appreciate that with Gravity Falls, that it didn't just continue on forever. But at the same time, I do feel like it ended things a bit too soon, especially when it came to the character of Ford. We're not really given that much time with him before we just go straight into the finale, and I feel like to really build a connection with that character more, we should have had a third season. Instead, we only really have half of a season with this character, even though he's supposed to be this big, important character. I think if Hirsch had decided to go with a season 3, we could have gotten that, but unfortunately he did not want to do a third season, and it is what it is. There isn't going to be a third season of Gravity Falls, and at this point, I wouldn't want it to, because it ended itself really solidly. Weirdmageddon was this just humongous, big, epic finale, and it feels like by continuing it at this point, I feel like it would take away from it, but I do, on some level, wish that we had gotten like the ending that we got, but had it at the end of a third season so that we could have spent more time with some of these characters and been able to like just fully, completely just close the book on it. And the way it did end, it felt like it was a great story, but it could have been just a little bit more. Maybe some people will disagree with me on that, but that's just my opinion, I guess. But ultimately, I still think Gravity Falls is a great show. LPJ22, how would you have done the last season of Star vs. the Forces of Evil? How would you have handled it? I mean, there's so many different, like, ways to answer this. I think the most blatant and obvious thing I would do is I would not have destroyed magic in the end. That was stupid. That was unbelievably stupid. I would never have done that at all. I never even would have considered it for a second. That was a stupid decision. So instead, I wouldn't have destroyed magic. Another big thing I would have done is I never would have had Kelly and Marco get together only to just break up off screen a few episodes later. That was stupid, and that was a result of them not properly planning ahead and understanding that they didn't have enough episodes to really execute that storyline, so they just had to drop it all at once, which was stupid. I'm saying stupid a lot, but that describes season 4 very well. If I could go back farther, in general, I would have really just not bothered with this love triangle stuff. I think it's silly. I love triangles are genuinely a trope I just do not like, and I feel like Star Versus is one of the worst examples of it. I mean, I guess it's not even a love triangle, it's like a straight up love square, and it's just, I think it would have, if they wanted to do Marco and Star from the beginning, they should have started setting it up from the beginning. I appreciate so much more when a series, instead of throwing a million obstacles between two characters getting together, I like it so much more when it's just straightforward, setting up these characters, and either they commit to the relationship early on, or at least if they're going to wait until the end, don't throw in any stupid like obstacles in the way. Just have the series slowly build it up, and then have that be an emotional payoff at the end. Or even better, have it happen in the first season, so then we can see their relationship throughout the show, like what they do in Amphibia, a show I absolutely love. And something I loved about it is spoilers for Amphibia. I'll skip to how Sprig and Ivy get together in the first season. Like, no fuss, no muss, just they get together. There's no stupid love triangle. Like, for a second, it seems like there's going to be a stupid love triangle involving Maddie, but they don't do that. Instead, it's just straightforward. Sprig likes Ivy. Ivy ends up being revealed to like Sprig and was the one who ultimately asked Sprig out. and it just works. It's just nice, it's satisfying, it's wholesome, and it's straightforward. And sometimes that's all a romantic storyline needs to be. I feel like a lot of the time, especially with how big shipping has gotten with the internet age and everything, is that people just get lost in these love triangles and all this stuff, and they feel like so much of the story has to be devoted to these elements, and it doesn't have to be. You can tell a satisfying romantic storyline, but you don't need to drag down the whole rest of the story with it, and that's what I feel Star Versus did, where by the end, they're putting so much emphasis on Star and Marco's relationship as everything else in the story just falls apart around them. And it made me hate their relationship as a result. While with Sprig and Ivy, I appreciate their relationship because of how straightforward and simple it is, and how it's just likable and enjoyable because you like these characters and you like them being together. It's as simple as that, and sometimes that's all things need to be. Nazer asks, will you ever make a Discord server? Love you, by the way. Thank you, Nazer. I feel like at this point, my channel's not really big enough to try and do something like that. I don't want to open up a Discord and barely even a handful of people are going to be in it. I feel like I should probably wait until I'm at least beyond like 10,000 subscribers to try and do something like that. But maybe someday I'll do something like that if people are interested. EXP asks, do you like it in Chernobyl? Oh yes, yep, I got a pretty good, pretty good room set up here in the ruins of Chernobyl right now. Unfortunately, I started noticing an eye growing on my foot, so yeah, that might be an issue, but overall, pretty pleasant in Chernobyl. Final question is from JR. That is a big question. That is a very, very, very big question. There is a bunch of different games I could potentially name off, but I feel like ultimately my favorite has to be Fallout New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas is the absolute pinnacle of open world RPGs. Like, I just love that game so much. I love the characters that you have as your companions. I love the world. I love the writing. I love learning about everything. I love like all the different ways you can interact with things, how different like aspects of the story will play out in different ways. It's such a good replayable game that I've played over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and I just still love it. I still love it. And there's still things that I'm discovering about it years later, and that's so satisfying. And it's just crazy to me how it's like, the first Fallout game I ever played was Fallout 3. I enjoyed that game when I was younger, but it's just when I played Fallout New Vegas, 3 just sort of felt like it became an afterthought, because New Vegas just felt like head and shoulders above that. And then we got to Fallout 4, and I was excited for Fallout 4 at first, and then I ultimately ended up being pretty disappointed with it, and I still feel like Fallout New Vegas is just, that is a game I absolutely love. And if you haven't played Fallout New Vegas yet, play it. It's a great game. I think it's, out of all the games I can think of, it's the closest one I can say to saying is my favorite, but there are many other great games out there as well. But yeah, Fallout New Vegas is the answer I'm going to get to that. So, yeah. And with that, that is all the questions we have for today. Once again, I just want to say thank you all so much, and I would love to be able to do another one of these Q&A sessions again, maybe when we hit another milestone or after a little while. But it was really fun doing this, and I hope to see you again soon.